From 1998 to 2012, I produced a radio show and podcast called Changesurfer Radio. The show was eclectic, but its tagline was a sexy high-tech vision of a radically democratic future, and it helped shape the technoprogressive ideas that we've been nurturing at the IEET. Many are still relevant today, and it's time to dust them off and share them again. This interview with Martine Rothblatt was broadcast September 5th, 1998. Martine is an international bioethics attorney, an advocate of freedom from socially constructed gender dualisms, a biotech entrepreneur, and a pioneer in building space-based communications. This is Dr. J with Changesurfer Radio. For the next half hour, keep your radio tuned to the left and your mind in the open position as we present a sexy high-tech vision of a radically democratic future. I'm on the air with Martine Rothblatt. She's an international bioethics attorney living in Washington, D.C., and chairperson. Are you still the chairperson of the bioethics subcommittee of the International Bar Association? Welcome, Martine.
Thanks, Jay. Glad to be with you.
You came to my attention last year when you wrote a book called Unzipped Genes, Taking Charge of Baby Making in the New Millennium. Have you had a lot of response to this book?
I've had some very positive response. I was glad that reviews in publications as disparate as Washington Post and Mother Jones all came to a common conclusion that the 4 principles of bioethics that were espoused in the book would, in fact, provide a good guidepost for genomic technology in the new millennium.
And, okay, let's do a review. What are the 4 principles that you articulated in the book?
Well, the first principle is that because the human genome should belong to all people, much like the oceans or outer space, that there should be no ability for private ownership of the human genome in the sense of patents on genes or companies marking off huge genetic sequences as being owned by them.
As they currently do.
Well, as they're currently attempting to do, it's not allowed in Europe, and the legal situation is still somewhat muddled in the U.S., but they're certainly attempting to do that. And the second principle of bioethics that is described in Unzipped Genes is that there should be no restriction on the freedom of any family to produce whichever genomes it pleases. What that means is that there are some efforts afoot to say that if genetic testing determines that a family has one or more genes that may cause illness or disease, that family should not have the right to produce children with that condition. And clearly, I think that takes us in a very negative direction. And the book strongly proposes that there be no restriction on the freedom to produce genomes within a family.
Okay.
The third principle of bioethics is that discrimination based on genetic configuration or any particular genome should also be outlawed. And as you may have heard, there have been cases already of people doing genetic tests on individuals and then prohibiting them from occupying certain jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, all racial and sexual discrimination is really a subset of genomic discrimination, discriminating on somebody based on the way their genome has produced a body. And I believe all of that should be absolutely prohibited if we are to enjoy the benefits of the genomic revolution. The fourth and final principle, Jay, is that any genomics services which a society makes available to some of its population must be made available to all of its population. And this is a very important point. We are on the threshold of people being able to produce, to some extent or another, designer babies, being able to modify the genomic sequences of of new zygotes so that they are less likely to develop cancer or any other means of kind of pre-life health care, if you will. And I think it's paramount that any of these genomic services that are available to some portion of the population be made available to all. And the reason for this is to avoid society being cleaved into a genomic overclass and a genomic underclass.
Now, you suggest that the consequences of the violation of these principles will be quite dire, and you give them two names, genomic imperialism and democide. Do you want to...
That's correct, and we already see this happening in some parts of the world. If we allow genomic technology to proceed in a completely laissez-faire fashion and do not regulate it with these principles, I think that we are truly going to unleash a dismembering of human society as we have it today. For example, in China and India, there was technology introduced that allowed one to determine the most basic fact about a genome, a human genome, whether it was a genome that would result in a male or in a female set of organs, sexual organs. And the use of this technology, which was unregulated, was immediately to be used for the detection of pregnancies of female fetuses and then terminating those pregnancies, with the result that an estimated 50 million female fetuses have been disproportionately aborted in China over just the last 10 to 15 years. That's what I call democide, and there have been a number of public opinion surveys where people have been asked if you could determine whether your fetus had a gene for obesity, or if you could determine whether your fetus had a gene that predisposed it to being gay, would you abort it? And a very large number of people say that they would. And now, pursuant to the second principle of bioethics here, I think decisions like that, which are made by individuals, should not be interfered with. But just as important is that these decisions not be encouraged by any governmental entity, lest we have a true democide or a wipeout of an entire demographic group, and also that we reinforce efforts in society to not discriminate against people based on their genetics, so that individuals will not want to make decisions about the value of a person based on their genetic configuration.
So you oppose laws which would ban parents from knowing or acting on genomic information that they might get through prenatal testing.
That's right, because I feel that these kind of laws inevitably drive the activity underground, and that they are an interference with a fundamental bioethical right, which is to produce whatever kind of genome an individual wants. I think the right way to get at that problem is to prevent discrimination in society based on sex, based on gender, based on physical appearance, and to propound the message through education and through media that the value of a person resides in what they do with their life and not with the shape of their body.
Now, one of the terms that gets bandied around in this debate is eugenics. Can you dilate for us on the difference between positive and negative eugenics, and how our contemporary eugenics is different from Nazi and pre-war eugenics?
Yes, the book has chapters on so-called positive and negative eugenics, and in the case of what eugenics is basically an attempt to produce quote-unquote better people by producing better genomes. And the idea is that if we can influence the genome of an individual, we can influence the individual. In the case of positive eugenics, there is efforts to provide incentives to people to produce certain kinds of genomes. For example, during World War II, in Nazi Germany, huge rewards would be given to blonde-haired, blue-eyed couples who would produce blonde-haired, blue-eyed children. That was positive eugenics. On the other hand, negative eugenics is trying to actually stamp out the genomes that the powers to be in some society don't like. So, for example, efforts in, again, Nazi Germany to eliminate all manner of Jews, gypsies, other sorts of nonconformists were efforts to stamp out entire categories of genomes. Now, I feel that in the book we also talk about other types of eugenics, which are what might be called sort of private eugenics and public eugenics. And in private eugenics is an effort by an individual family to sort of produce the genome that they want, whereas public eugenics is when there's any kind of public, governmental, social pressure on a family to produce one or another kind of genome. I believe that there's nothing wrong with private eugenics. It's I think almost every family, when you choose a mate, you're thinking a little bit about, you know, what one's kid might be like. When you choose to adopt a child and you say, I want to adopt a boy or a girl, all of these are activities of private eugenics and are more or less harmless. Public eugenics is very frightening because in public eugenics, an elite power group is imposing a rule on what kind of children masses of people can produce, and that's what results not only in the horrors of the Holocaust, but even right here on our own shores in the United States, we had efforts to sterilize classes of people that were thought to be less desirable than other classes of people. And this effort during the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and even currently in some parts, results in locking out some groups of people from the right to produce children, and I think that that's a fundamental violation of their human rights.
Now, given your relatively libertarian framework, which is that people should basically have control of their bodies and their right to produce the kinds of children they want to produce, it's startling about halfway through your book you make a proposal, and it's obviously a very provocative and not terribly practical, but well-argued proposal, that on the same logic as vaccination, that one of the principal plagues in our world is unplanned pregnancy, and that we will have the technology in the next century to inoculate people against unplanned pregnancy, or in particular men from causing unplanned pregnancy. Do you want to talk for a second about inoculating your concept?
Yes. Well, first, I should mention that the subtitle, the book's main title is Unzipped Genes, and the subtitle is Taking Charge of Baby Making in the New Millennium. And hence the book looks forward to really a fairly long horizon of several hundred years and forecasts what sort of technology is likely to be available and to be used, and what sort of rules should we as a society develop to marshal that technology. In that vein, I think it's fairly likely that people will routinely, in fact, have their zygotes, the combination of a male sperm and a female egg that forms together a new human genome. I believe it will become routine and then ultimately universal, that this human genome be examined as what's called, quote-unquote, medicine's smallest patient before implantation in the woman's uterus for ultimately its growth into a fetus, embryo, and ultimately a child. And in the nature of this trend, there will be, I think, a feeling that impregnation of women without their conscious decision to become pregnant is in fact causing a disease, and that disease is an unwanted pregnancy. And one way to combat this disease would be to combat it the way one does with other diseases, which is inoculation. And inoculation means inflicting a small harm, if you will, on somebody to prevent a much larger harm. The small harm in this case would be preventing anybody, male or female, depending on the extent of the technology, from being able to impregnate another person at will. And the larger harm that's avoided would be the huge amount of unwanted pregnancy in the world, which is on average about 50% of all pregnancies. And from my perspective, these are all 50% of unwanted genomes that are coming into the world against people's wishes. Now, it's absolutely fundamental, Jay, that the fourth principle of bioethics be respected here, which means that any genomic services available to some be made available to all. And that means any kind of implementation, genomic healthcare, genomic modifications, be made available to all people. And hence it's proposed that there be a mandatory inoculating of all people at some point in the future when such technology is available, so as to prevent unwanted pregnancy.
Obviously a very provocative idea, but you have many, and so I want to move on to your previous book, which is The Apartheid of Sex, a Manifesto of Freedom of Gender, and just say a word about that. The argument that you make in this text is that people should not have to choose between being male and female, and that there are many more opportunities and ways of expressing yourself in the world than the two bipolar options that were given. And you have been very active and vocal in arguing for freedom from these sex-gender distinctions. That's
right, Jay. I think that the notion that everybody is either male or female is about as limiting and archaic as the notion that everybody is either black, white, brown, yellow, or red. And it's interesting that the most rapidly growing category in the U.S. Census for racial or ethnic identification is other. And people are opting out of what were once thought to be hard and fast, rock-solid, biologically based racial categories. And we realize now that there's a mix of genes in everybody, and whether somebody appears facially to have a certain skin tone or facial appearance is only a small portion of their genetic complement and not a logical basis for categorizing the person. It's a similar thing with sex and gender. We're used to thinking that, everybody has either a penis or a vagina, and therefore everybody is either male or female. In fact, the penis or the vagina is really, in the book, The Apartheid of Sex, shown to be no more relevant than if somebody has dark pigmentation or light pigmentation. And similarly, it's just as wrong to, from a legal or economic or social perspective, classify people starting at birth as either male or female, as it would be in the old South Africa to stamp on everybody's birth certificate black, white, or colored.
And finally, you are involved with a project called Sky Station, which is a major challenge to the various conglomerates of folks putting up telecommunication satellites. You want to say something about that?
Sure, I would love to. Jay, Sky Station is a project to provide global broadband wireless telecommunications using stratospheric platforms instead of either satellites or land-based systems. And the technology has just become available within the last few years for a platform which is sort of like a very large satellite to be kept stationary 22 miles above a metropolitan area, and to provide from that much closer location to the Earth a huge increase in communications capacity compared to satellites. You can understand this by a satellite in space is like shining a flashlight on a back wall. And if you do this, you can imagine that you probably can only put sort of like one beam of the flashlight would cover the whole wall. Well, as you move the flashlight closer to the wall, the area that's illuminated will become smaller and smaller, and you can imagine how many different beams of light could blanket that wall. And that's what the Sky Station project is about. It's about taking the capacity of a single satellite, multiplying it 1,000-fold over a city by putting the electronics on a stratospheric platform. This technology has met with great appreciation worldwide, and I should mention that just last year, the International Telecommunication Union, which is an organization consisting of every country in the world, voted unanimously to approve, as a matter of international law, the authorization of sky station platforms worldwide at a specific frequency band that has been reserved for them.
Well, you are definitely a change agent for the future, the kind of person that we like to have on this show. And I really appreciate your coming on air.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss sky stations, stratospheric communications, the apartheid of sex, and unzipped genes.
And there are links to your various websites or web presences. You have books out, and so I have links to those books and to the video that's available about apartheid of sex, and also to the Sky Station project. Those are available at www.changesurfer.com/event horizon/. And I hope that we can have you back in the future.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Changesurfer Radio. If you want to learn more about radical democratic transhumanism, or want to share your thoughts about the show with me, Dr. J, email me at jhughes@changesurfer.com. Also check out past and future shows and myriad relevant links at the website, www.changesurfer.com. Check back next week at the same time for Changesurfer Radio.